Okay, good morning. I'd like to call this Strategic Priorities Committee to order Tuesday, April 21st, 2026, 9 a.m. Town Hall Council Chambers. The meeting is being broadcast live on our Town of St. Mary's YouTube channel. The Council for the Town of St. Mary's acknowledges with gratitude and respect that we're gathering on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse, giving thanks for all creation. I'll begin this morning by asking for declarations of pecuniary interest, starting with Councillor Edney.
None, thank you.
Councillor Luna?
None.
Councillor Lucas?
None.
Councillor Pridham?
None.
Councillor Alward?
None.
And I have none. The agenda was circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or issues with the agenda as printed? Seeing none, I'll seek a motion that the April 21st, 2026 Strategic Priorities Committee agenda be accepted as presented. Someone willing to move that motion? Moved by Councillor Edney, second by Councillor Luna. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call to question. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Okay, under reports today, we have a presentation from our CEO with regards to strategic priorities review. I think this is more of a check-in, but there is a chance for council to talk about any issues in terms of the strategic priorities we've outlined in the past and operational items, and our CEO will talk about an overall project.
Yep. So thank you, Mayor. So as Councillor Edney had said just before the meeting, really there's nothing new here today. In one instance, I have a new format for presenting the information to you just because I think it's a better consolidation. And that's going to be our second discussion about what I call our strategic action plan that will continue through the end of this term, and we hopefully will be handed off to the next term of council so we can continue the good work we're doing. But the first thing I wanted to talk about on the agenda was that standard conversation we have typically every July and then confirm in August, where staff bring forward the status of what we believe council's priorities have been, as well as some of the major projects and forward-looking work that we're working on, and confirm with you that we're still on track, and then ask you that opportunity to add anything new or make any adjustments. But because we have just a little bit of extra time today, and I'm the only person on the agenda, I just wanted to take a quick moment just to kind of explain the process to everybody. Because it's helpful for me in my mind, because with all due respect to this group of council, I'm now starting to think what things will look like in October and November and how I'm going to present to a new council. So when I think of municipal work, I typically put it in two piles. So as a municipality, there are things that we are statutorily required to deliver and do. So we have a number of services and programs that the province just says, because you're a municipality, you must do. And then there's a number of other ones that we just make decisions that we're going to have. So services like recreation. So there's a lot of good day-to-day work that provides our steady state or our baseline service level. So if you think of something like plowing the roads, we're statutorily required to maintain the road to a certain standard. We have to buy a plow truck, we have to employ staff, we have to buy materials, and then we have to go out and plow the road. To me, that's just great work that we do. It's a service we provide. But when you look at your 2026 departmental goals and priorities, that type of work isn't captured because it's assumed that we have to do that. So when staff approach their workloads every year, we always know that there's a certain amount of day-to-day work that we just have to do to maintain that service level we always provide, to follow up on resident inquiries, to deal with concerns. And so that takes up a certain amount of time. That could be all we do, and there are many municipalities that do that. You think of smaller northern municipalities that have very, very finite resources. They just provide that very basic minimum service level that they have to do for statutory. For us, I think we've always looked at ourselves as a more progressive municipality, and we like to look at forward-looking projects. So I always like to say that we've embraced a continuous improvement mindset, and there's other things that we want to do. So that other bundle of work is typically the work that forms what you see today. So we have a strategic plan. Out of the strategic plan, we have a number of other documents, forward-looking documents that give us advice on what we should look at as we go forward. There's always ever changes in legislation that we then have to respond to and develop and design programs and processes to address. There's always best practices that our staff are identifying. So through their industry agencies, they're always learning about new things that could be done, improvements that we can make in the way we do our business. So that's always in the forefront of staff's mind. Our capital plan, while some of it, again, relates back to that baseline level of service that we have to provide, there are a number of things in there that are forward-looking. And then through all of that, we always bring forward a number of staff reports through every year to you, where council makes decisions, you give us direction, and assign us and send us on our merry way. So that creates this other fairly large pot of work. So when you combine that with a baseline level of work, I always come forward every year and say that there's no way I can get all of that work done in a year because I have to do my baseline level job every year. But I always want to pick 2 or 3 or 4 things that I really want to achieve. So when you look at the chart that I have, we almost start at the bottom because this thing's cyclical, so you have to pick a place to start. So what staff are then challenged to do every year is they're challenged to look at their strategic plans, their forward-looking documents, changes in legislation, best practices they want to implement, what their capital plan is saying they have to do, and they create a laundry list of work that their department needs to achieve in a year, in addition to all those steady state baseline level of work that they have to do. That creates their departmental plan. It gives them a vision of the current year, and in some cases, directors have made it multi-year. They look at 3-year departmental plans of work they're trying to plan out over the next few years to accomplish the day-to-day, but also move the municipality forward. What then I ask for departments to identify the top things that they want to accomplish in a year that we're prepared to put on paper and make publicly available through this meeting, so that if we looked back at the end of the year and said, okay, what did we actually accomplish this year? We could look at a sheet and say, here's everything we plan to accomplish and we did accomplish. That's the document I'm presenting to you today, and that's the document I typically present to you every July. So it's not everything a department's going to do. It doesn't capture any of that baseline work that we have to do just to be a municipality. It doesn't capture everything a department's going to do. If I think of somebody like Public Works, who has multiple divisions, they'll have multiple sheets like that for these staff. What it really communicates is, here are the top priorities of council that we think we're going to achieve this year. Here's the top priorities of the department we think we're going to achieve. And here's the new and different things that we think we're going to achieve that people need to be aware of. So what I typically do is, once we're done with that and we have that identified, more often than not, I write those in as goals for the directors so that we know that it can be measurable and that we are going to see it move forward. We document it, and then we bring it to council again in July of every year. So that kind of describes what it would look like if you just started from scratch. But every year now we're tinkering with this. So when it feeds into council in July, you folks have a discussion of, yeah, we still see these as our priorities that we have for the corporation, or maybe we don't, and staff, we think you can set that one off the list. We want you to add this new one. After we have that conversation, I update. I keep pointing out, it's this list here. We update this, and it's always timed so that we're in budget and have enough time that if you say, no, we really need to go look at this street and fixing this section of that, we have time to actually budget for it, put it in the plan, and then have you approve it in the fall. And then so once that's adjusted, again in the fall, the cycle starts over again. I look back at the directors and say, okay, we've had council's feedback on what they think is important for the corporation in your department, reflect on what you had planned to do in your either single year plan or your multi-year plan, what needs to be adjusted, come up with a new plan, come up with your new top priorities that you would like me to document. Now let's put those into goals for staff and directors, and the cycle just kind of keeps going. So what I have produced for you today, and the first question I have for council is, I really want to focus on this, the department goals and priorities, so it's attachment 1 of the report. What you see here today is very much the same as you saw last August. It documents everything. In last August, we tried to document everything we thought, we're going to achieve in 2026. We've now had a good chunk of time to start working on this, so there have been some amendments. Anything that's been completed, we have taken off. Anything that may have emerged as a newer priority for us in the last several months, we've now added on so that you're aware of what we're working on for this year. But I'd just like council to just have a look at this and give me any feedback on whether or not you feel that this captures the priorities that you would hope to see completed in this year, and because this is the last year of your term, in your term of council, making sure that we're moving things forward enough. I've also provided for you, I think it's attachment 2, is a summary of the status of all of your outstanding actionable resolutions from this past term. So this is something we keep in the background where if council passes a resolution and says that staff be directed to go do X, Y, Z, and it's not just a simple routine thing like signing an agreement. We keep it here so we don't lose track of it, and this factors into it as well. So I'm just going to open it up for a council conversation like we do every year. Are we still moving forward the priorities that you see as important? Is there anything on this list that you think needs to be revised because it's changed since the last time we talked about it? maybe abandoned because it's no longer a priority. And again, that ever-present question of is there anything that's new and emerging that you feel that we need to address in our work plan for this year? And if there is, I'll do what I normally do. I'll take that information and feedback now. I'll go back to the staff and sort out how it impacts their annual work plan and the timeline that we can accomplish. And then I would report back, and we'd have it approved at the next meeting. So that's the first conversation. Then I'll talk about the larger document in the second conversation.
Okay, so we'll just open it up to any topic at all? Okay.
Yep, any topic at all, with maybe the exception of talking about this longer strategic action plan. I'll try to explain that. Again, we'll have a similar conversation about this, but I'll try, I want to give some context of where this came from.
Yep. So I guess we want to talk about departmental goals and just ideas and operational things, or any questions anyone has that anyone noted. Councilor Pridham.
Thank you. First, Public Works, in our consideration, when we looked at Ontario Street, we heard from the residents that there was a need for extra parking on that street. And when we're reconstructing that street, we're looking at it with that view and that lens. And I think that's something that should be carried forward with all new reconstruction projects, because when you look at neighborhoods that maybe need a refurbish on the street, but they've got a park, or they've got, expanded accessory apartments and or other things within that neighborhood that make we've got road allowance. We've got a 66-foot wide road allowance, and we're using it for boulevard and sidewalk, when maybe in some instances, as we're doing the work, we should add a little section for that community parking. That could also play into development as well, when you looking at Greenfield and adding that sort of road system.
Okay, thank you. Other items? Councilor Howard.
Thanks, Your Worship. I was just curious about the Lind Park Master Plan and the DCVI partnership. Is that still happening? I guess I'm wondering what's going on with that.
Yep. So through the mayor, it is still happening. So it was a great project last year to engage high school students, and they provided excellent ideas on how they might want to see the park be re-envisioned. To close that project out, what happened was we had a landscape architect on retainer that took all of the students' ideas, created a design, and then has priced it out. It's one of the projects that we still need to bring back to council. So if you recall, your director of corporate services left last August, and as we went through the transition plan to create the 2 new departments and move work forward, that was one of the projects we set aside for a time being, just because it wasn't as time pressing as the others. So that's on Ms. Cubberley's list to bring back to council to close out. I will give you a foreshadow. It's extremely expensive to do and implement the plan that has been designed by the students. It's beautiful and probably something that I think we can look at as a vision for the park if we're interested in, and then break it into components that if ever there was grant funding or a donor who's interested in updating the park, we could build component by component over years. But again, in my own, my professional opinion is that when we think of the spending that we have to do as a municipality, spending the hundreds of thousands of dollars to revitalize Lind Park is probably not something that's high on our list right now. But we do owe you a staff report back.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Pridham.
Another one is in the tourism and economic strategy, there was several times suggested that the community events that are happening would be supported through the town to enhance tourism, bring more people to town, bring more people downtown, all of those things. And this was a letter, an email that came this weekend to the community players when they had asked or kind of tagged, I guess, or some sort of, I don't know how the media situation went, but the letter was basically that it wasn't and wouldn't be supported. And so through the town's media services And I had thought that that was, as I read, as you read farther on, I just circled a whole bunch of things that basically had that statement in it. And so I just want that to be something that's added as a current thing, not something in the future. And we've got a lot of events happening.
Yep. No, and you're entirely correct. So the response that you may have been given probably is reflective of our process and our practice today. But you are entirely correct that I know it was in the tourism and marketing plan, and I know it's written in here as either a midterm or long-term initiative for us to better support other things that are happening, because it means we don't have to deliver that thing if it's just promotions and media. So I know that Amy and Kelly have sat down and have taken a hard look at the tourism and marketing plan, as well as how it's been translated into our strategic action plan, and they're just starting to work on it now. The tourism and marketing plan, it's an interesting plan in a way. Again, something that was probably a consequence of turnover when Mr. Moran left, that it sat on the side for a little while. But there are a lot of good recommendations in there. The only recommendation I don't necessarily agree with is its implementation approach. What it was trying to say was that we have to do a bunch of work for readiness first before we can even start to implement the rest of the plan, or else we'll have wasted effort. When I took a secondary look at it, what I realized was that there are a significant amount of great recommendations in there that could happen today before we do all of this readiness work. So I think there's a significant call to action in there about us doing more in the downtown. Like, again, revitalization is just getting people to a place, and then it naturally becomes more vibrant, right? That's kind of the philosophy I've now adopted. There are really good recommendations in there that take only a little bit of work from us to try and just market or promote or do a pop-up to get people into the downtown that, again, as I've talked to Ms. Coverley more and more, it's those types of things that I want to see us tackle.
Councillor Edney.
Thank you, through your worship. This is kind of twofold. Zoning bylaw enforcement. So there's many businesses run from homes. We've addressed some of them, but they do become, because of the size of our town, a little bit personal at times. I know there's a number of hairdressing salons, yoga studios, massage, music schools, whatnot, running out of people's homes. So this goes to parking. One of the reasons we're zoned is so that we can provide adequate parking. You want to support the downtown, then we also need to look at, you know, who's competing on a non-level playing field by operating from a not zoned area, commercially from a not zoned area. And I think that just needs to, you know, we had the stand up on Queen Street there. We talked about that, and there were some issues there. But again, it's personal. It's, you know, and I think we have to have a much stronger, and I don't mean stronger in terms of enforcement, but in terms of understanding, so that it's understood by all parties. I do believe the whole thing's been exacerbated by the COVID virus, because many people were trying to find different ways to operate from home at the time. It becomes incredibly convenient, and no one wants to relinquish that. So I think that's something that a new council may want to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. I'd like to see under housing more creative, innovative ideas to get more housing for people that can't afford what's on the market right now. I was reading about this 3D, I don't know what it's called, 3D concrete printing for housing. The town of Leamington has done it and has been quite successful with it. So I'd like to see things like that come forward, more creative ideas, maybe out of the box ideas to provide more housing.
Okay. Further comments? I had one here, and the report touches on it, but I think it's something that council needs to revisit, is the balance between recreation and use of the PRC for business purposes and attracting events like the quilting show. I think, you know, with, you know, the money we spent, the reparations for the pool and different things, you know, it's easy to get too focused on recreation, as the fact of the matter is that we need to sustain that building. And going forward, there's going to have to be, I think, probably a service review that we did like a number of years ago, because the outside pressures on us in terms of policing and, you know, conservation authorities and all these things continue to, escalate at 2 and 3 times the rate of inflation. So I think that we need to revisit the business model for the PRC. We've focused on a lot of the repairs, and staff have done a good job on laying out for us what it costs to sustain the building and what repairs need to be had and so forth. But I also think that we need to revisit, which ties into the tourism strategy. We talked about this a long time ago, about events and how much we can actually do there to use the space to try and generate revenue, because I think we've sort of got away from that focus in the pressures and the success of recreation. I think even the Quilt Show, for example, which is a wonderful, an amazing event for the town, I would say, the reality is there's a lot of pressure, and I hear it from some of the residents as well. Wow, it's closed down for 2 days. But I would argue the spin-off from that event is incredible. And I know staff have tried a number of things. There was a circus, and there's been different things and so forth. There has been efforts, but I feel that council has got away from the directive of supporting staff and trying to do events like that, and I think it's something that we need to revisit that ties into our tourism area. And I think that this isn't meant to be a criticism of staff. I think they're under extreme pressure, because I think that we have spent so much time focusing on repairing the building and making the building successful and trying to implement a business model which was lacking before, that we've got away from some of the events focus, and I think that we need to get back to that, and council needs to revisit that. And it speaks briefly in this to this, but it's certainly not laid out, because I do think that when I look ahead, I think that staff have been very creative in cost savings and trying to make things efficient. But the reality is that there's a lot of storm clouds on the horizon, and we've seen, like as I mentioned before, huge, and we know they're coming. Ambulance, police, all these things. The province has not stepped in to regulate any of these costs. And I think that we're going to have to do a service review, but we're also going to have to look at ways of looking at revenue. And I think that the last couple of years, we've kind of got away from that. And I think we need to speak to that. I don't know.
It's fair in a way, because I think through the 2025 Recreation Master Plan process, there was always this, you had a priority every year of, we need to come up with a definition of the PRC. And I think what you heard through that process was, you're busy, you're programming, so the community center really is now just going to be used for programs, and you should look at it long term and maybe turn it into more recreation focus for like a gymnasium and things like that. I know the challenge that staff have is they know that the senior center and the friendship center is highly busy, and so that the place is programmed every year. And whenever we move programs out for a day or 2 days or 3 days, it causes some frustration, which then you folks hear. But I think you're right. It's about balance, and I think back to the way we operated the arena for a little while, right, where we needed to fill the rink, so we recruited tournaments into our facility. Once patronage locally grew, tournaments didn't really balance off with our normal use of the building, so we've had to reduce that. So there probably is a balance where we can rewrite something in there to say that we don't want to leave the facility empty for a period of time, hoping that somebody comes. But maybe you could give staff direction to go out and actively seek 1 or 2 additional trade shows per year, which then gives you, properly spread out through the year, so it's not all kind of in one spot, so that you don't frustrate your users if you want to use it for recreation. But then that kind of brings you, some of the highlight of the community that you're looking for through having a trade show, but still allows you to have program in it as well. So I think if we do it as an active statement like that, that's, staff go out and just add 1 or 2 extra trade shows per year, or conferences per year, or fairs per year, that could be easily balanced and mixed in with how we're using the facility today.
And in fairness to staff too, there are a lot of limitations with the place, because there wasn't a lot of thought given to that, in my opinion, when the place was designed. It was designed with more of a recreation focus, and I learned this the hard way through talking to some people about trade shows and so forth. It could be better, and it may require. That's why I think council needs to look at it, because I think it would require a bit of investment. But I think they need to have a look at weighing out the aspects. If we're committed to tourism, it just can't be the downtown. It has to be the overall town as well. And I think that we need to have a look at that. Councillor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. And along those lines, the financial aspect, I've brought this up before and it's never gone anywhere. Out-of-town fees for people that don't contribute to the recreation aspect of the town through taxes. The people of St. Mary's are getting double whammied through their taxes and through the fees. and out-of-towners aren't. And I know other municipalities do charge out-of-town fees, and I don't understand what the reluctance is here. I understand that it was a fear of driving people away, but people are still going to come to St. Mary's for what we offer them here. And I'm not talking about double the fees or anything exorbitant, just a reasonable upgrade in the fee.
So it's kind of a layered answer. So that was something we actively looked at in the 2017 Recreation Master Plan. And the recommendation of the day was that until you have 100% usage of your facility and, you know, the demand for the facility far outweighs the supply, you're better just to charge everybody the same fee so that you continually fill your building. And so council of the day and then council since in our fee philosophies have accepted that, saying that it's better to have a program with everybody paying the same amount and have 75% full than, you know, the few people who may be annoyed by paying an additional fee leaving. The other more complicated component of it is we still have an agreement from the mid-2000s that dissolved the Arena Board that says that you know, people who live in Perth South are charged the same fee as St. Mary's residents. And so that was an agreement we made in effect so that the town took sole ownership of the facility, sole care and control. And then any contributions that Blanchard and Downey had made to this facility were then just kind of donated. The difficulty, it just becomes more of an administrative headache to try to find out whether you have a St. Mary's fee, then you have to find out if they're registering from Perth South, and then whether or not they're from outside of that area. So those two answers combined is really why we haven't charged an out-of-town fee. What we've done on the fee philosophy is adopted something a bit more different in that when it's recreation, we now have, we call it our pyramid, so that if a program is mostly public benefit, then we are prepared to charge it at a lesser rate, meaning that we don't fully cost recover. But if you have a program where it is just individual benefit, so I want to run a program, it's a specialized swimming program that's really just for me and I'm renting it, I have to pay the full charge if it's just for a small amount of people. But again, if you want us to pursue or go back and ask our Recreation Master Plan consultants to provide you a paper on whether or not we should charge out-of-town fees, now would be the time to add it to the list.
Do we need a motion for that?
No, I can just, again, I think what is going to happen is I'm going to create a long list of the ideas I'm hearing. I'm not going to write anything in here. It's going to give me some direction to go away and, I think I'm still on. Okay, I think I must have got over it, and sorry. I don't think you necessarily need a motion today. Like what can happen is, like we've done in the past, out of today, Jen and I will pass no, we won't pass anything. We'll draft for you a larger motion that just kind of describes the things you want us to try and make edits to this document, and we bring it back, and then you could debate it at that time whether you want things in or out.
Okay. Further issues? Councilor Pridham?
Just further to that, there's a membership fee for some things, and that would maybe be a little easier than individual programs to just say, okay, because you're from out of town, the membership fee for the Friendship Center or whatever. And I guess you have to research how that works with your document. But I could see that as maybe an easier way to ease in. And they may actually, the people coming from out of town may then appreciate the fact that they are using a service that isn't supplied by their municipality and they're using it, you know, within St. Mary's.
Councilor Luna?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think I agree with the thought that it's difficult to manage. I think that's what you said in different words, but if people are applying online, it would go by zip code. If it's not an N4X, you'd get this fee. If you're an N4X, you're this fee. Seems simple to me in this day and age with computer registering and all that, online registering.
And through the mayor, it's one of those things that seems simple, but if I recall correctly, we use ActiveNet, and I believe there's a limitation in ActiveNet that makes it's very difficult to differentiate that way. So there's a reason now why A good example is swimming lessons. So where there was this constant concern from residents that St. Mary's residents weren't able to sign up for swimming lessons and had to always compete with out-of-towners. So now we just allow St. Mary's residents to sign up a day in advance of out-of-towners, because there's not, if I recall correctly from Stephanie, within ActiveNet there isn't a way to toggle between, like, address doesn't matter, it doesn't differentiate, it's a software limitation. And we invested significant funds in that software only 5 years ago, so it's one of those things where the cost to change to a software program that gives us the capability to do it would probably never outweigh the benefit of the extra fees of collecting it from those folks. And again, what I'm going to share is that your out-of-town fees you're going to collect are really end up being from, you won't collect anybody from the township of Perth South unless you want to pursue and break the agreement with them on the arena board. So then you'd be looking at anybody south of town, and then from, outside of Perth South. And it gets a bit more layered and complicated, because when you look at somebody like St. Mary's Minor Ringette or St. Mary's Minor Hockey, you charge them an hour. I guess you're just looking at that association. That association has out-of-town people. You'll have out-of-town people using your facility. Then you'd have to have a question of my question would end up being, what's equitable, right? If I'm a person from Stratford paying an out-of-town fee to swim at the pool, will I be annoyed when I learn that a hockey player from Stratford who's playing in minor hockey isn't paying an out-of-town fee? Because our primary customer is St. Mary's Minor Hockey. So unless then you were going to go further and say to somebody like St. Mary's Minor Hockey or St. Mary's Minor Ringette, tell us everybody who is an out-of-town resident and out of Perth South resident, and we want to then charge you an increased fee on top of that, and they charge back. It's something in simple. It sounds easy, but it's not easy when you start thinking of the actual way you're going to administer it and the political ramifications. And again, the advice we got from Monteith Brown several years ago, and again, was that just based on simple economics, right now the demand does not outweigh the supply, and when demand doesn't outweigh supply, there's no reason to charge that extra subsidy. And it's just one of those things that you have a community center. It's an attractive part of your community. It's an investment. It brings people here, it brings residents here, it brings newcomers here, it brings visitors here, and you just look at it as part of your whole economic development portfolio. So, but again, that's just me saying that. If it's something that you truly want to pursue, I have no problem with you adding it to the list, and we can bring you back like a fairly thoroughly researched report so you can understand all of this and make a more informed decision.
Councilor Craigmile?
Thank you, Worship. My concern with the out-of-town fees is more related to the larger projects, whether it be minor ball, could be hockey, ringette. I mean, currently what the situation is, and we had it even last year, especially with some of the female 18 B or C, I can't remember exactly which one it was like 9 girls. So you need 12 to be able to field a team. The girls themselves went out actively looking at their friends in the surrounding area to get up to 12. And so they were able to have a team. But things like this that's it. Now you're going to have a team that's not playing. So you got 10 residents or 9 residents that aren't being involved. Then the PRC has less ice to sell. I mean, it's that snowball effect. And I'm sure the same thing happens in baseball and all these other minor sports. And now as the legislation is for the way they operate with open borders, it really makes it very difficult. I mean, into trying to track here in town, I can honestly say that I do know at minor hockey, if you're a goaltender, they waive the fees because without goalies, there's no team. So if your goalie happens to be in, Perth South, or whether they come from Medina, I mean, it is important. And then you've got the coaches and the trainers and everybody doing the amount of volunteer hours your costs related to that. And I'm sure that 50% of the actual coaches and trainers in a lot of the sports do come from outside our community, but in our catchment area. So I agree with Brent that it sounds easy, but it's not easy, and there's a lot of snowball effects, and it could have very negative impacts on the overall selling of different things that we do have.
Okay. Further thoughts? Councillor Albert?
Thanks, Your Worship. I guess something I've just been thinking about lately is if we could organize some sort of public consultation with regards to the patio policy. I think now that it's been implemented for a couple of years now, it'd be good to go back and see if people are still into it, especially business owners. I know lately I've had some tension, especially, well, obviously downtown, with the fact that patios are taking up what is considered kind of premier parking spots, right? You know, we've talked about that lately. So I think it'd be good to kind of get a sense from the business owners, sort of whether or not it's still working for them. Because I know we've talked about brightening up the back alleys, and we actually, I believe there's a proposal going forward for a patio in back of one of our downtown businesses, and I'm wondering if that's something we should be trying to encourage rather than procuring parking from the main drag. But
Okay, further thoughts? I know it's an impossible issue, but one of the things that, you know, I get asked about all the time is childcare. And I think that we need to continue to make that a priority. And I'll be honest, when we did the child care center, I thought we'd solved the problem for 20 years. Little did I know or understand. At the time, it seemed like it was a very good deal. And, you know, there was a proposal that to build onto the PRC at the time, which never went ahead, which would have been extremely expensive, and I'm not so sure it would have been the best solution. But the reality is that there is still strong sentiment in the public about child care, and without provincial help, I don't think we can afford it. I'm not suggesting that, but the reality is I think that we continuously need to look at innovative ways, and I know that as a result of COVID, a lot of things have changed in terms of what was there, in terms of how the facility runs, and I understand that. There still are labor problems, and there's extreme cost problems, and this whole $10 a day daycare has created, I think, enormous headaches in the system in terms of the perception of the public, because we have a large waiting list. Well, you know, anyone that has childcare, why wouldn't you put your name on the list? And so I think that we need to make that a priority. I don't have any solutions or suggestions, but I think that's something that council continues need to talk about. Further thoughts, comments? Councilor Pridham?
I'd wondered about 14 Church Street when that comes on, if that could assist in some way the daycare, childcare situation. I don't know if it could, but it's a space that we own. And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to mention it.
Okay. Further issues, thoughts? Councillor Albert.
thanks, Your Worship. I was actually wondering if we could at some point get kind of a report on the Discover St. Mary's site, like the tourism site that we have. I guess I have a theory that the way that we draw tourism and eyes to town on the internet isn't necessarily, I don't know. I have a theory that maybe it's not through that site. I could totally be wrong, but I do wonder if the main website gets more traction, even from out-of-towners. And if we're splitting between those two websites, I just don't necessarily see as much of a point. And the BIA is also looking at developing a website sort of for their base, and I see a lot of like wires crossing on that section as well. So I'd just like to get a little more information about it. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Lucas?
Thanks for the mayor. There was a mention in here about green waste, and I guess part of my thought is on a go forward, knowing that we're doing some significant changes to the landfill. I think it should be a focus. It's something that's been mentioned to me by members of the public, and I know it was visited at one point, and it was cost prohibitive. But I think we're coming through some changes now with Pro taking over the recycling and stuff like that. So I think we need to look at, and we're obviously gonna, with the ICNI, we're gonna have some cost issues there. So I think I think that all becomes part and parcel of that delivery service.
Okay, further thoughts? Another one I had on my list is that I think we need to look at how we engage the public. I mean, while some of our surveys have been overwhelmingly successful, some have not. And I would argue that some of the ones that are overwhelmingly successful get hijacked by special interest groups. So staff have been quite good and quite creative. We've tried a number of things, you know, coffee with council, we've been at the farmer's market, we've done some things, but I think that that's something that we don't want to lose sight of, because when we're doing exercises like this, sometimes we only hear the most vocal instead of the largest group. And I mean, I would argue, I think that our marketing staff and our communication staff have been quite creative, actually, and quite good compared to a lot of municipalities in terms of, but it's led to an expectation from the public that I don't know if we can sustain forever, but also I think that we need to look, because some of our surveys have not been that successful. And I'm just wondering if we shouldn't look at different ways to engage the public, because these seats are almost always empty unless there's something bad going on. And the reality is that I sometimes feel out of touch or not engaging well enough or getting the feedback from the public that I think we should. And it's not just here. This isn't a criticism of staff, but I think this is something that we can continuously look at, because since COVID, I think a lot of things have changed, and I think that we have to work extra hard to engage the public, which sounds ridiculous, but I think it's true. Other thoughts, issues you want to talk about? Do we want to just briefly go through the pillars just to make sure that if we can, if that would be okay?
Yeah, so in my mind, I'd actually structured this as two different things. So like, this is all really helpful. I think some of this, I kind of look at it in two different ways. So the conversation we're having right now is more, you know, work we need to work on the next 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year. I can't commit to getting all of this done or even started before the end of this term. And then we have the strategic plan that that I think is, you know, to me, is kind of that continuum. It's a constant thing that sticks around and stands. So what I plan to do, some of these pieces of feedback, I'll admit, some of them will be better placed in this strategic action plan and a call to action there. And because to me, it's not necessarily something that's actionable and we need to go and do. It's more of a philosophy. And so anything that's a philosophy is what I like to put into the strategic action plan. So that kind of brings me to the second conversation. So I always reserve the right to change my mind and even contradict my own opinion. And so I'm going to do that now. I like to be accountable, and I like to have an organization that is not afraid to admit when they need to reconsider their thought process and change. So I think for several years I've come forward to council and said, you know, I enjoy this process. I think we have a very robust way of talking about our priorities, talking about emerging issues, and doing our best to make sure that we're you know, staff are going in the direction that council wants us to go. The thing I've said over the last number of years is I'm ever concerned about whether or not we are, as an organization, are we diverging with where the community thinks we should go as well, or at least their input. And I know I've advocated for a more formal strategic planning process where we go out and we do public engagement and open houses and all of that good stuff. As I was thinking about this and I started looking at things a bit more, I'm not as concerned anymore that we're not current with what our public is saying. And what I mean by that is, my opinion for the last several years has been, we had a strategic plan from 2017. It was very actionable. We moved a lot of things forward, and some strategies had become stale dated just because they were now getting closer to 10 years old. But when you look at the chart that I've produced in this report, and I did this for my own benefit, to try and figure out what have we actually done since the 2017 plan was adopted, you can see in there upwards of 20 other plans that have resulted directly out of the strategic plan. And many of those involved a formal planning process, which included a public survey, public open houses, and lots of public feedback. So in my mind now, I'm more confident in believing that we have, as the mayor said, continually engaged the public since 2017. We've invested in plans that further refine our strategies and how we want to actually implement some of these things that the 2017 plan asked us to do. And we're in alignment with what the community is saying. that combined with, again, this robust process that we have every year where I bring to you what staff have heard over the year through, just their day-to-day work or some of the projects that they're working on where they're doing engagement, and you folks bring forward what you're hearing from the publics. I am more confident now that we are in alignment with where the community thinks we should be going. And I think, again, I truly think empty seats in the gallery is sometimes reflective of that as well. But it still doesn't deny the fact that we didn't really have a strategic plan. So what I started thinking about is that in 6 months from now, I could have, forgive me, I kind of planning contingencies. I could have 7 new people in front of me, and they could be sitting here saying, okay, Mr. CAO, what is it like? What is the town doing, right? What is important to the town? How are you addressing it, and why are you doing it that way? And it's always the why are you doing it that way questions that I like to put back to something. So, why are you addressing childcare? And I can say, well, it's been a priority of council for years, and it's in our strategic plan. I would always go back to the strategic plan for that to be my document, but because it was out of date, what I've done is I've rewritten our strategic plan based on what I understand to be our philosophies, our broad level philosophies on each of our pillars. I think the pillars are still very current, with a slight retitling of a few. I know we have kind of decentralization of our strategic plan because we have these 20 plans that have recommendations in them that, in fairness to you folks, you probably don't even remember half of these, and I don't expect you to intimately remember every single recommendation in them. So even for a council to understand where we're going, what our key strategies are, if you have to flip through and find 20 different plans, it's going to be an impossible task. And I'd heard that from staff. I'd heard from my staff that, having this beautiful color-coded document that I've created every year that talks about council's top priorities for the year, top priorities for the term, other priorities, other strategic issues, and the way it was organized was confusing. So what I've done over the last several months is I took our central document that we've been working on now for 3 years, that we talk about every year. I looked at each of these plans that we've invested in over the last 6 to 7 years, and their key philosophies and their key calls to action, along with what was still, in my mind, current in this 2017 strategic plan. And I just went ahead and took a risk and liberally updated it. So what I've tried to do in this larger 21-page document is keep everything that I thought was still relevant. So things that describe the way we do our business. Infrastructure is a great example that we're just going to always do this. It's always going to be ingrained in our organization, and it's important to keep forever. So I've left those things in there. But anything else where there was key recommendations out of something like our asset management plan or our tourism and marketing plan or our rec master plan, I've tried to consolidate into this document, reflecting the timeline that was assigned to that recommendation when council accepted the report. So that now we have one document to come back to, so you don't have to grab the rec master plan, you don't have to grab the tourism plan, you don't have to grab the communications plan, you don't have to grab that as a councillor. You can come back to this and say, okay, now I know what our strategy is. And as I said to the mayor, and again, aptly put by Councillor Edney at the start, nothing in here is new. So everything has been, I didn't make any of it up. It either came from your priorities documents or one of these plans. I've just reorganized it in a different way, and especially the vision statements under the pillar. Much of that is original content from me, but I'm just trying my best to describe what I've heard over the councils I've worked for the last 2 to 3 terms, especially in each of these areas. So I'll just start quickly. I'm not going to go through every single tactic because, again, it would take us forever, and you've in some fashion at some point in time, most of you have already seen this work. But I just want to explain my approach, what I've reconciled into each pillar so you're aware. And then once I'm through that, again, similar conversation that we had before. Is there any other philosophical thing that we're missing that we should add in here? Is there anything in here, again, that you'd like to see moved around in terms of priority you think we should work on earlier? I'm happy to do that. And then once we've taken that feedback, I'll bring back whatever edits we need to make into a future meeting. So for under infrastructure, as you can see just from my staff report, this, in my time here, this has been the area where we have focused, I think, most of our effort. And really, we have a great asset management plan from Hemson and a 40-year financing strategy. And it's always we've always been challenged to be proactive. So many of the statements in here are those that were carried through in the 2017 plan because they were still in good shape. But what I've done is I've just taken some of the key recommendations out of the AMP, as well as, and the goals out of the AMP, as well as your own priority statements. Your priority statements as a council have always been pretty strong and good as it relates to infrastructure. And now just layered it over different, over each of the strategic areas of focus. I think for the most part, this pillar remained the most relevant today as compared to 2017.
Councilor Reddy?
Thank you, through your worship. Will we stop after each section for questions, or will we do the whole thing and then come back?
Whichever is easier for you.
Go ahead. I think I'd prefer, see.
Yeah, it's probably easier to go, if you want to go pillar by pillar, that's fine. And I'm not going to get on this one in particular, I'm not going to get really into any depth. I can tell you that our vision statement comes directly from the 40-year asset management plan. Many of the strategic areas of focus on the left-hand side remain the same as they were in 2017. Really, it's just been updated for currency and to have some updated language from the AMP that it was just a little bit nicer than we'd written in 2017. So happy to take any questions on Pillar 1.
Councilor Luna.
Thank you, Worship. So under the maintenance prioritization, there's 8 town icons listed there, that 3 aren't designated. What would it take to designate those?
I'm hoping Amy's online, and Amy, could you describe to us what it would take to designate the historic water tower, the Water Street Bridge, and the Grand Trunk Trail and Sarnia Bridge?
Yeah, sure. Through the mayor to Councillor Luna, I'd be happy to speak to that. Because they're all municipally owned, the designation process for those is quite simple. So it would just be a matter of myself and some of our volunteers that help with our heritage property research, compiling a full history on the property and bringing that to council, I guess first to the Heritage and Culture Advisory Committee, and then that recommendation to council to proceed with designation.
Would you prefer a council motion, Amy, for it to be handled that way, or?
Actually, so
Sure. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say it'll be captured in a moment, so I will write down that.
You write it down, okay.
Yeah, what we're gonna write down is that staff report back on the process of designating.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councilor Luna? Yeah.
Yeah, I just think in order for us to justify spending money on those 3 structures in particular in the future, it would help to have them be designated and show that they are important to the town. And I think they are.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Councilor Craig Mount?
And along the lines of what Councilor Luna was asking for, I think it's real important, but I think it's also important that council today understands what the pros and cons are. Say the Grand Trunk Trail, is it going to limit how we do any maintenance or things like that for upkeep? Is it going to, is it going to increase cost 25% to meet some of those things? And I think one of the features that we do have in town that we don't ever want to lose is, of course, the falls, and I'm not sure that anything we done there, and if Upper Thames had their way, it wouldn't be there. I mean, so, you know what I'm saying? So sometimes there's a lot of features inside the town that are town features, and I don't think it really matters whether they can be designated or not. There's things that council today wants to manage and look after.
Okay, anything further? Under Pillar 1?
Okay, so pillar 2 is an interesting one because it's communications, and year over year. So back in 2017, there was a very distinct priority of council to be more of an open and transparent organization. We created staff positions related to communications, and over the years have then expanded those to include our events portfolio as well. So when you looked at the old version of the strategic plan, much of the communications pillar was exhausted. And we hadn't really talked about communications as a priority at the council level for really the last 2 terms of council. And that's not a bad thing. And that's one of the things I always try to share with staff is that, oftentimes you'll hear from a staff member saying, well, I don't see myself in the strategic plan. I don't see anything in there specific to me. And it doesn't mean that that is not important. Usually what it means is that council and the community and leadership don't see it as a priority because we already have something that's good in place. So if you are working really well as a proactive communicator, you don't need to keep adding strategy after strategy after strategy, saying we need to be a proactive communicator, because you already are, and you're just going to continue to be. However, when I looked at some of our recent plans, so in 2018 we had invested in a communications and marketing plan, and then in 2018 we completed a business plan for the PRC, and now we had our tourism and marketing plan from 2024. Each of those plans still had recommendations in there that are relevant to today that we haven't actioned on as it relates to communication and marketing. So everything that I've written in here is reflective of that, that call to action that we had in 2017 of be a proactive communicator. So kind of that motherhood and apple pie stuff that we have that says this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. It's still in here, and I've kept those good components from 2017, as well as integrated in those things that I still thought were topical and relevant from the 2018 communications and marketing plan, the PRC business plan and marketing that facility from 2018, as well as the 2024 marketing plan. So that's what has brought this forward, and why you see really a good heavy component on just corporately be proactive. We need to do more in terms of marketing, recreation, and then the tourism and branding has been a really key theme for several years, and that's why that's in there as well as the call to actions around social media that have come forward in the last several years as well.
Okay, any questions about that? Councilor Pridham?
Just to highlight that the tourism marketing strategies, they weren't really outlined within that from that latest plan. It does say tourism, but that's the one word that it says, I think, that relates to that plan. I know it's highlighted in the other area, but not necessarily in communications.
Yeah, and what I tried to do is, so you're right. There'll be times where you see the same thing crossing 2 different pillars. So what I tried to do in communications and marketing was really put in there the things that I knew our corporate communications department would be responsible for. And then under Pillar 4, everything that relates to tourism and marketing in there is everything I would expect our tourism and economic development folks to be responsible for. That way, again, internally, it gives me it creates a clearer line for me to assign work to folks to say, yes, you're going to have to work together on this, and we can't be in a silo, but under Pillar 2, communications is the primary lead. Under Pillar 4, tourism and economic development is a primary lead, and then I know who to hold accountable.
Okay, anything further?
Okay, perfect. Okay, number 3. So this one I have. This one is quite a bit different than the last Pillar 3. So strategic Pillar 3 in the past was called balanced growth, and it was always a confusing pillar for anybody to kind of understand. It had components of housing, it had components of economic development, and I believe it even had components of communications or something else. But what I'd always kind of rendered it down to is that the things that were unique in this pillar were really about building a community and offering. What we were trying to do in 2017 was say, we don't want to see population stagnate, and a key way for population not to stagnate is to make sure we attract people to St. Mary's, and the demographic at that point in time that we were trying to attract were newcomers, which is anybody from outside of St. Mary's, as well as retain our youth. And it kept being this continuous call to action of, building public services, offering public services. I thought, actually, the Recreation Master Plan and another one had a great articulation of this about building sense of place. And then through that process, the health unit actually had given us a great paper about what a community does to add social infrastructure to create a sense of place, a sense of community. And by doing that, that's really how you attract people in your community to want to live here and make it feel more than just like I always say the engineers, kind of utilitarian utopia of black road, straight lines, all that kind of stuff. We're not in the business of just building, Brent the engineer's utilitarian utopia of, stark nothing. Like we have to invest in things like libraries. We have to invest in things like 14 Church Street and recreation facilities to make this a nice place to live, to make it a town worth living in. So really, this entire pillar has been reframed in that way. And when you look at what we've done over the last number of years, we've continually invested in things to say, what can we do to attract newcomers? What can we do to attract and retain our youth? What social infrastructure do we need to have in place? What programs do we need to have in place to make this a nice place to live, and a supportive place to live? And that's really the new and kind of novel thing that we're doing now. So that's what this pillar is trying to articulate. So I really like that word, social infrastructure. It's much better than the old way of saying soft services. I think social infrastructure communicates the importance of those services and what they are. So again, there's that call to action that talks about make sure that we responsibly invest in social infrastructure. We can't be everything to everybody, but when a good idea comes forward and it makes financial sense and it looks like it's going to be used and it's going to benefit the community, then we will think about it. Public transit, we've invested in our transit needs assessment, so that call to action is in here as well. Over the last number of years, we've really talked about that changing landscape of socioeconomic issues. We've invested in our community outreach program. We've partnered in the community safety wellbeing plan regionally. There are great calls to action in that community safety wellbeing plan that will always guide us in how we should do this, so I've integrated those in here as well. And then this is where I've kept childcare as well. So as the mayor said in the previous conversation, childcare is a continual need in the community. It's one of those services that's very difficult for us to meet the need without spending tremendous amounts of money. But I think what council had said to us several years ago in your priority session was, we're going to have to accept the service level we provide today, but staff, we want you to always be opportunistic at looking at innovative ideas to create new childcare in the community, even if it's private childcare. Be innovative when funding becomes available and do whatever you need to do to try and increase. So that's what we're trying to say here as well. So that's, out of all the pillars, I think this is the one that's changed the most fundamentally and philosophically, but I think it better captures now what we were trying to capture in 2017.
Okay. Questions or comments? Councillor Edney?
Thank you, through your worship. So this was my favorite part to read, partially because just late last week, prior to getting this package, I had a great conversation that started about 14 Church. But what it ended up being was kind of describing what the theory of third place is. And I was able to communicate that a few years back, not that long ago, most people in this community located their third place outside of our borders, providing the services at 14 Church, the coffee shops, everything that we're doing to try to keep that third place within our borders it's fundamentally what makes a community. And so this was just a great, and I have to credit our CAO. I think most of what came out of my mouth was something I had regurgitated from what you had previously said. So I'm glad you're indicating that is an important part of building the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. I'm just curious whether the GO train coming to Stratford now affects the PC Connect plan at all?
No. In fact, it actually makes the PC Connect plan a little bit more important. If we can't have GO extended to St. Mary's, the PC Connect plan has always been to kind of start with this wider net, get people to nodes like Town Hall, and then get them on the bus and get them over to the transit station in Stratford that is close to the train station. So if GO becomes well used, and we can't get GO into our community, then we would just market PC Connect more to say, we can get you to Stratford to where the GO terminal is, and depending on what the GO schedule is, it just may mean we need to adjust our PC Connect stop schedule to make sure that we meet and match their schedule. And knowing Mr. Mousley over in Stratford, I'm sure he's already started to think about that.
Something I wanted to talk about, and I think I like the way you've labeled this community building and sense of place. But part of this exercise is identifying challenges for the corporation and ways to overcome them. I think that there should be some sort of statement in the pillars about the town being committed to being a competitive employer and creating a cultural workplace that is, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but satisfactory. The reality is that in spite of what the public thinks sometimes, retaining staff and growing staff has become a huge issue for this organization. And just think in your mind the amount of key people that we've lost in the last 2 years. I mean, Stratford takes great joy in stealing them all the time, actually, and I hear about that from the mayor. But the reality is that this is something that is difficult, and I'm not making this speech because I'm seeking re-election, because I'm not. I'm not trying to gain favor, but the reality is that I think it's important that this council makes a statement about that, and sometimes it's difficult. It would be easy for us to say, yeah, we want taxes to be 1%. We could achieve that, right? But if we don't have the people in place that deliver the services, which I think we do in a lot of situations, but clearly we're starting to see gaps and we're starting to see struggles with recruitment. And we've talked about this in closed session. We've talked about this as a group. So I think it's important that we focus on that, because lots of times the public don't understand that a lot of the reason in the staffing we have is because of provincial regulation, right? And every time there's a new program or something, it creates another job for someone, or it creates a difficult thing. And I love getting in conversations with people, and they'll say, blah, 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 X number of dollars. I mean, the Sunshine List has become a real cause of inflation, in my opinion. But the reality is if you start digging deep, and I'll use the example of PRC, well, blah, blah. Well, what happens if we didn't have this person or this program? Who would run it? Who would do this? And especially in a society where we're seeing volunteerism decline in some respects. And for example, a number of years ago, we made the decision to enhance the tourism area in terms of events and different things. The town, in my time, has picked up a lot of things that I think were kind of done by outside agencies in the past. So we've continuously gone through and tried to contract out and tried to reduce service and done service reviews in certain areas while maintaining the sense of place and maintaining the town worth living in that we talk about all the time. But I think in order to do this, and I think it's more than just saying we're a living wage employer, big deal. That covers the bottom tier, in my opinion. I think it's important that we make a statement, say we're a competitive employer and work towards a great cultural workplace. And that's not cheap. That's difficult. I mean, as I said before, if we all wanted to, say we decided this past budget year, or the mayor, say I did it because apparently I'm a strong mayor, said it's going to be 1%. We could all do that, but what would it really do to the living, and what would it do in terms of maintaining staff? So it's not in here. Not everyone might agree with me, but I think that we need to make that statement because I think it's an area that the public don't really understand. And I think if we're going to maintain these kind of services and this kind of culture in St. Mary's, we have to be committed to being a good employer. Yeah. Councillor Craigmont.
Thank you, Richard. I agree, and I think that's one of the issues that no matter who is sitting at this table, is that if you want to get up to speed, if I went through the strategic plan with the different pillars, there'd be certain things that I would like to see somewhere in the background that would educate me on some of the pitfalls or the downfalls or whatever. I could take social infrastructure, St. Mary's, take healthcare. What's one of our issues there? The issue is we're so close to the University of Western Ontario that we're at a complete disadvantage to all the other communities because we don't get any of those grants. And that's substantial. And we're only talking going another 20, 25 miles away. So, and I think that's with every pillar, but I like the way this is laid out because I do see a lot of, it is a living document, and now that we do have a GO train station, the way we're doing the PC, it will relay into whatever that schedule happens to be and things like that. So, but somehow I'm trying to think, how do somebody new sitting here, how do you get educated on what some of the backgrounds of all these pillars and what some of the issues are?
I think we call that December to January of next year. Yeah. And that again, selfishly, not selfishly, I did a lot of work ahead because I expect, again, I always plan whenever we go into an election year, I always make my plans as if I'm going to have an entirely new council, and then I have to think, okay, what am I going to do to make sure that at least that council understands who we are today, what we're doing today, and then they can make an informed decision of whether they like that or they want to see change. And so really what I've in my monthly report, I've kept calling this a handoff document, but what I'm asking, what we've done is created something that says, this is who we are, this is how we do things today, this is what we think is important, and this is where we think we're going next. And I'm asking you folks to bless it so you can say, yes, as a community leaders that are in the chairs today, we agree with this. The difficulty is there's so much context behind it all. You can never explain about why. And so that's what orientation comes down to. So that if it ends up that on November 15th, we swear in 7 new councilors, I know that it's going to take me days and days and days to explain this and explain the why, and then probably lots of individual meetings in my office as new councilors come in and say, I just need more information. I really don't understand why childcare is so important in this community, because I didn't really pay attention to that through the campaign trail. I didn't hear much about it. Tell me what's going on with childcare, and it would take like probably a 20 or 30-minute history lesson and conversation about how the Canada-wide grants work and all that kind of stuff. So I hear you, Councillor Craigmile, and everything is just through a robust orientation process in the fall.
You get that all the time from the public, what's the issue? Why don't you just hire a couple more people to go work at the daycare center and put in, well, we're bound by what we can do because of where the funds come, and we have to meet certain regulations. And
Councilor Lucas?
Thank you, through the mayor. I think strategic pillar number 3, I think is actually going to become very important in the upcoming years. Because I think not only are we going to have to compete for employees in this town, I think we're going to have to compete for growth. I really do, and I think if we don't have some of these things in place, I think we're going to struggle with growth. I think as our economy turns down, if I can move to Stratford or London and I know that there's a robust transit system in place, that's a key factor. You know what I mean? So a lot of this stuff in here, childcare, all that stuff, I really see this pillar as being important over the next term of council for sure, until, as immigration levels kind of right themselves and we see what happens geopolitically. I really think this is going to be an important thing to focus on.
And this is honestly one of the favorite things I get to do in my job is this kind of stuff. And it sometimes is difficult for me because it all makes sense up here and I can kind of see the crazy web of like strings and how things connect together. And this is where things really start to work together, because if I was to describe our community, I'd say, yes, we need to have the social infrastructure in place. We need to do things that, our typical tagline, we need to be the town worth living in. We need to provide supports to those who are in need. We need to provide interesting things for everybody in our community to do, whether it be recreation, the arts, yada, yada, yada. But that has to be balanced off, again, with that fact that we're a small town. We can't be everything to everybody. And then you start layering this on top where it says, here, build the social infrastructure. But on other pillars, it says, yes, you have to do that, but you have to do it under kind of a robust, methodical business plan approach. You can't just say yes to everything when we're asked for the new park or we're asked for the new that and the new that, because we only have finite resources and we need to keep taxes low. So it kind of works together that way. Okay, let's do it. Let's challenge ourselves to do it. Let's not be afraid to take a look at it, like so many small municipalities are. And if you're going to do it responsibly and make sure there's a need, make sure that you have a plan in place, make sure you can afford it. And then once you do it, you go to the economic development pillar, and what it says is, now you've done it and you've got all these great things in your community, create a community profile and market the heck out of it so that people know who you are, what you have, and why you're so great, so they come. Because I don't disagree with you that, the economy is changing, growth is slowing, and we are going to have to be more competitive in marketing just who we are as a community and why it's great to live here. The fact that we have schools, the fact that we have a PRC, the fact that we have a hospital, the fact that we have a library, the 14 Church Street, all these great things, and say, just come here and live here. So again, I love it because I can kind of see it all work, how it all works together and how we can have a strategy. And I sometimes But that's why we're consolidating it, because when you have 20 plans kind of working independently and you forget that they're all there, and you forget, sometimes you just get in your own stream and forget they all cross over. At least now we have one document that shows us how that crossover works.
Councillor Luna? Yeah.
Thank you, Worship. I think it would tie into this pillar. I think there's well, I'm going to call it a threat, because I think it's a threat from the province in the fact that there is rumors of downsizing the number of municipalities. And obviously, a separated town would be one of the first to hit the chopping block, I would think. So I think we need to keep proving ourselves to not only people that live here and around here, but to the province that we can function, and we function well, and we can grow, and we don't need to be amalgamated with anybody else.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments on the pillar? Okay, move on.
Okay, so pillar 4, again, a pretty heavy update here, but for good reason. So philosophically, I think our approach to recreation and leisure has changed since 2017. So in 2017, the Council of the Day was faced with a PRC that had a number of empty rooms, unused hours of ice, an empty pool. And so what the challenge of the day was, you know, what are we going to do about this? And we need to start rationalizing and becoming more scale appropriate. So if you even look at the 2017 Recreation Master Plan, it was really focused on, you know, how do we find third parties to fill in our spaces? How do we shed some of these services and cut costs? What we've learned since, you know, through the pandemic and after the pandemic is that it's like individuals learned that to miss what they couldn't have, and our programs are bursting, and we know that now. And you heard that through you hear it from Stephanie all the time. You see it in her user numbers. We see it in how our parks are used, how our playgrounds are used, how our playing surfaces are used, how the PRC is used. It's a very busy place. So now it's kind of the opposite. And from, you know, the Horseshoe over the last 2 terms of council, what I've heard more and more said is, we are in the business of providing services. We are the business of providing programs, because that's what we do to build community. Again, we just have to do it in a scale appropriate way, in a cost effective way. So that's the overall theme of this, and that was the overall theme that drove your Recreation Master Plan. It's what drove your PRC business plan truly in 2018. And now that we're, you know, more mature along some of the strategies that were in the old 2017 plan, we actually have plans to, you know, refresh Milton Donald Park. We have an old Corey strategic vision. So all I've done in this pillar is take really there's 72 recommendations in the Recreation and Master Plan. I don't expect council to have memorized all of them. Not all of them are strategic in nature. Some of them are truly just operational in nature. But anything that was strategic in nature and that could be bundled together to make one kind of clearer strategy, I've written into here. So you'll see that in some of your strategic areas of focus. The Pyramid Recreation Center, there was still some really good stuff in our business strategic plan from 2018, so that's reflected in here, some key call to actions. But anything related to facilities and parks, what's the last one here? Recreation trails, outdoor playing surfaces, all directly from your Rec Master Plan. Again, so it's just an easier, more consolidated way to see it. And then the Water Street Corridor has been something that we've focused on now for about 4 years. And now that we have plans in place, I've just taken your priorities that you've communicated to us year over year and written it in here so it's easier to find.
Councillor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. I'm not sure where we left my 2-tier user fee thing. Are you looking into that, or are you going to bring a report about that, or?
At some point in time, when we get through the conversations, we'll probably have to take a 10 to 15 minute break so Jen and I can reconcile our notes. And then I'll have that in a resolution of something that an edit you'd like to see either added to 2026 priorities or this document. And then what I would do is I'll bring back a marked up version of both of those to a future meeting, probably next meeting. And then at that point, you can finally debate the edits and whether you want them in or out.
Councillor Pridham?
Thank you. You mentioned the Water Street Corridor, and in the long term, it has about parking concerns in the area. And as I spoke earlier, when we're doing reconstruction or some sort of revitalization or whatever you want to call it in an area, we should consider parking as well. So I mentioned it, I think, a few meetings ago when we were talking about the courts. So the courts, we're going to be talking to Upper Thames about extending our playing surface into, more of their flood zone and redesigning the walkway. Well, why at that time wouldn't we take that parking area and expand it as well? I know it's taken down some trees, but what's needed is more parking. So we're in the process of doing that. And so that's where I'm looking at when you're looking at different areas and what's already going to be happening, which is a reconstruction of sorts. Why wouldn't we add the parking into basically every, we got the downtown parking as well. So I'm a neighborhood, parkland, wherever that work that's planned to be done, consider that parking component.
And it's a good point, actually, as I look at it. It was on my list to add in here about parking review for Water Street South Corridor, and it's a notable omission, so we'll make sure we add that in.
Okay, thank you. Anything else under this pillar?
Okay, so pillar 5. So this used to be, I think, an economic development and culture. And again, the philosophy in 2017 was, and again, the ideology of council was that council was hearing a lot about heritage, but what they were challenged to think about was that heritage is truly just a component of culture, and that St. Mary's has culture, and it should be culture that is leveraged, and culture is heritage, the arts, and our architecture, all the great things that we have. So for years, we've tried to say that we need to leverage culture as a primary economic driver, which really is leverage culture as a primary tourism driver. So that philosophy is what I've tried to make very front and center in all of this, is that culture and tourism is what we want to see drive our economic development portfolio. Through the years, we've been given advice that, for a small town really can't do much in the way of initiatives and promotions to attract big business to come to town. That we heard through the Heinz closing that big business will decide to come or leave your community for their own reasons and not really for anything you can do. And that's the attraction part. Expansion, again, there's very little that a municipality can do in terms of offering programs that a business can expand. They're going to do it if they wish to or not. What it comes down to is economic development in a small town really needs to be on retention focused, and that's where we've shifted over the years. We've always said we need to bring people to the community, bring people to be patrons of our businesses, and especially our small businesses in the downtown. And then we need to complement that with a number of initiatives to support them as well and make sure that they feel heard and that we're being responsive. That's what this pillar is now trying to capture, and trying to capture in a clearer and more precise way. So that's why it's been written the way it is. Thankfully, we've invested in the tourism and marketing strategy in 2025, so it's very current. And as I said before, once you get past like their initial recommendation of do all this readiness stuff and then go implement, again, I don't truly like that because it's kind of an excuse to wait, where when I look at a lot of the recommendations in that plan, I think we're already there and ready to do them. We don't have to do a lot of the readiness things. I think we can jump into this. So what I've done is I've taken a lot of the tourism and marketing strategy recommendations and worked them into here as they fit into a strategic area of focus. In the past, we always had this one thing called downtown revitalization, and I know people got sick and tired of the word revitalization. So I've changed it to vibrant downtown space, that we recognize the downtown, we recognize its cultural and historic and heritage value, and we just want it to be vibrant, and here's a bunch of things we can do to make it vibrant. And really that's where I've tried to weave in that philosophy that all revitalization is getting people to a place, and then it'll naturally become vibrant. We'll naturally have to pay more attention to it, and it'll get cleaned up and better. The event strategy, it comes directly from the tourism and marketing strategy. And then finally, again, like as I said, this all needs to be complemented with business. We still have a component of traditional economic development that's important to a small town, and that's those more retention-focused strategies that we need to think about and that we can actually have an influence on and we can actually participate in. And really, they come down to being more common sense type of approach to this business relationship and business support. So you'll see that in here as well. So that's this pillar, again, really and primarily driven straight from your tourism and marketing strategy, but making it a bit, it's a big document, and it, quite honestly, when you look through the implementation plan, there's strategic calls to action are kind of smattered all throughout it. I've just done my best to consolidate it in a sensible way in this document.
Okay, Councilor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. We don't issue business licenses, correct? So in issuing them, maybe not with a fee attached to it, but just some kind of a license to, if somebody walks in here and says, I'm thinking of opening a nail salon, how many nail salons do you have in St. Mary's? Nobody has a clue, I'm sure. I don't have a clue. Would something like that not help to get an overall picture of what is in St. Mary's?
It can. I know that economic development does hold a business directory in the background that should be current. So if somebody was to ask how many nail salons you have, as long as people have given us the information and the staff have kept that list up to date, then we should know. The only when we talk about small town business approach, business licensing would help. What Councillor Edney, has talked about before about in-home businesses and people maybe not working in the legislative zone. The flip side of it is that sometimes people look at that as a barrier, and we're always encouraged to reduce red tape and remove barriers, and it's just another fee. So if the true goal is a business inventory, that's something that if it's not in here in a clear way, I can make sure it's in here in a clear way so that we have that. Like kind of the call to action of continually keep an up-to-date business inventory.
Okay, anything further on economic development? Councillor Edney?
Thank you, Worship. Trying to keep in mind that my job is to create policy, not tell people how to do their jobs. I'm really excited that we've embraced the social media aspect of marketing our community. I'd like to see a lot more hiring influencers. The impact that they have on businesses is out of this world. And I can tell you probably the last 20 things that Leslie and I have gone out and done outside of our community have been prompted by influencers. And there was a business in Etobicoke that I went to see because an influencer had created a video. When I got there, the place was called Crudo's. I'm doing my own influencer. It was an Italian sandwich shop. The influencer's video was very convincing. I got there. There was no parking for 3 blocks. The church next to it was full, and it was a Saturday. And there was no parking anywhere. And the lineup was about 45 minutes long, and that was to place your order. And then to get your order was probably another 20 minutes to a half hour. But I've seen this same impact in so many other places, and even standing in a lineup, just turning around and asking someone, what brought you here? Who was seeing this video of this influencer. I feel like we have so many beautiful things that could be focused on, and we have a couple of influencers in town as well that could probably be subsidized to some extent for their influence. So I'd like to see a little more of that.
And the good news is I just flipped through it. It is in here, and I know in the last 2 years we've started with that, and fully agree that I've had tremendous success with it.
Councillor Pridham?
Thank you. I'm glad you're focusing on actionable now within what I'm seeing here in this section. I think about the Recon Culture and Leisure Master Plan that was done in 2025 and how Stephanie and her group, man, they were on top of those things and knocked them off so quickly. Some of the ones that were very actionable without any sort of direction from council, they were just done. And then there's others that are still pending, which take time, right? Which is fine. But I see that there are so many actionable items, and this was another 2025 strategic plan for tourism and marketing strategies. And I'd just love to see the same sort of boom, 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 get them done within that plan.
again, I'll just shameless self-plug. I think that's a good reason why when I brought to you that idea of splitting up the old corporate services department into a finance-focused and now a culture, tourism, and engagement-focused portfolio, that is what I see the true benefit of doing that is that department has, in my view, great potential, exciting work ahead, and through a very clearly articulated plan. And the hope, again, I have high hopes that they grab it and they implement right away, because I agree, when I was writing this, I wasn't as familiar with the tourism and marketing strategy as I ought to have been when it came to council. But as I got myself more immersed in it and read it, I thought, like, there are so many things here that make common sense and are, in my mind, just seem so simple for a small town to implement, but could have big impact. And I think the biggest part of that readiness component is what they were trying to say is you need to have buy-in, and that will be one of our challenges. Is we need to make sure that we can get our downtown businesses and some of our stakeholders in culture and tourism as excited about these recommendations as we are, and be prepared to take some small risk and a little bit of extra effort and have some buy-in. And I think we can do some really interesting things.
Ms. Howard?
Thanks, Your Worship. I would just like to echo what Councillor Pridham has just said exactly. I think, so recently I actually reread the Tourism and Marketing Plan for Fun, because that's what my life looks like these days. I find that was sort of what stuck out to me, is that it was a 2025 plan, and it felt like we just need to get some of these things going. So I was happy to see them come back again here. I'm very hopeful that we can get them kind of implemented in the future. I know we're down an individual in that department right now, but as we pick up and get going again, I really hope that these can become quickly actionable. So, thank you.
Okay, any further under economic development? Okay, pillar number 6.
So pillar number 6 is, again, it's pretty much stayed the same. I've written it in a slightly different way just to make it clearer and more reflective of what we have today. But what is in pillar number 6 relates to, again, housing and that ever-present concern that we have about needing to have just more stock in St. Mary's, and then also in addition to more stock, more affordable options. So what you see in here are those high-level strategies and calls to action that are articulated in your opening doors plan that you've accepted a few years ago. I really like this new approach just because it simplifies it into 3 strategic areas of focus, which have, I think, always been the ones that we've talked about as a small town, what we can do. You need to have all the policies in place that you can possibly to encourage development and make it easy. And along with that, then approve all the housing applications that come forward, which, again, I think we have a big check mark beside. I think we have some of the most proactive policies around, and we are approving everything. We can do a little bit in terms of incentivizing housing through our CIP and offering grants, and again, responding to whatever the government asks us to do. And then we have our own land considerations. So it's really simplified it into those 3 things, and then put in those key strategies that the opening doors plan challenges us to do. And it's a nice one-stop shop to say this is what we are and how we're going to do housing.
Comments, Councillor Luna?
Thank you, Worship. I find it interesting that housing as a pillar is probably the shortest of the information here. To me, it's probably the most important pillar. All through this, we've talked about retention and retaining our youth in St. Mary's and growth, bringing people in. So that all relates to housing. If they can't afford to live here, they won't come here. So I think that some of these long-term initiatives need to be moved into the short-term column. For example, ensure procurement practices for innovative initiatives. I talked about the 3D concrete printing, whatever the proper term is. A lot of these long-term goals should be moved, I think, into the short term, and we need to get moving on some of these things more than what I'm seeing is happening.
Okay. Further comments on housing or thoughts? Councillor Lucas?
Thank you, through the mayor. This one has a particular meaning to me, not only personally but professionally, but I just have to comment that we've been super progressive as a council and the council before us, and the staff that's in place right now is if you talk to people out of town, our staff is exceptional on this. So I'm always a firm believer in let the people in the business of housing create the housing, and the market will drive the rates. So again, if you've got lots of options and lots of choices, it's gonna set the market rates. That's supply and demand is fairly straightforward. But I think we've done really well when you look at our community in the 4 years of the term of council and all the building that's gone on and that has come through. I think that's a kudos to staff for and council for being open to that. So just want to make note of that.
Okay. Anything further on housing? Councillor Pridham?
This is something that maybe needs to be investigated a little bit. Downtown, we've got some restrictions because Upper Thames will only allow a certain density of redevelopment of existing maybe apartments upstairs. And I heard, and I'm not sure that this is a fact because I haven't talked to building and planning about it, but that you can put in, and this also helps with tourism, that you can put in a Airbnb or a weekend rent, like a rental accommodations, short-term, in a space that's commercial upstairs without having to go through the residential application, because it's not a permanent residence, it's a rental, and it's transitioned all the time. And that might open up the opportunity for those upper units that are now restricted because they have to be deemed as apartments to something that can attract tourism and visitors to the town and avoid the Upper Thames restrictions on that unit, if they're so inclined to have a rental, if they are so inclined to have that, constant changing of people. I say short-term rental, not long-term rental.
That's something we maybe need to report back on because that's not my understanding. But there's been so many changes, it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I don't understand it completely either, but this is where I've been led to believe through other people that have embraced the opportunity of Airbnb.
That's certainly interesting.
It is.
Yeah. Councillor Alward?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just while I'm thinking about it, do you have a vague idea of what the current kind of percentage split between housing and I don't know, I guess I should say like other community projects with the CIP is? So I believe we discussed it the other day.
This is where I'm going to have my numbers all off, and I should have looked them up after you asked. If I recall correctly, we've either put $75,000 or $100,000 into the budget a couple of years ago, and if I do recall correctly, I think it was 1/3 to CIP projects, 2/3 to housing projects was the split. Now, don't quote me on that. I will follow up for sure, but it was something along that split.
Okay. Anything else on housing? Brent, do you want to take a recess and just assess your notes and so forth before you do that? Is that
Yeah, if you could give us 10 to 15 minutes, if that would be okay.
15, 20 minutes, sure. Everybody okay with that? Yep. Okay, we'll reconvene then. Mr. Kittmer and Jen have summarized the notes, and maybe just a presentation of what you've given to council, please.
So thank you, Your Worship. So admittedly, Council, some of the things you've discussed, as I said earlier, under the corporate priorities and projects that you might want to see happen this year, probably will be translated into more strategic level calls to action in the plan, and the reverse is also true. Some of the things you talked about, making edits to the strategic action plan, may end up actually being more actionable things this year. So based on the notes that I've heard and the way we've just translated it into a resolution, we would consider establishing standards for on-street parking during road reconstruction projects where appropriate, take a more proactive role in supporting and marketing community events, report back on how proactive zoning bylaw enforcement could be implemented. So that's to that point about how we might deal with home-based businesses. Embracing all creative and innovative ideas and initiatives to create housing. Report back and revisit the strategy to secure additional trade shows, conferences, and fairs, et cetera, at the PRC. Report back on methods and approaches to implement out-of-town user fees for recreation. Complete a review of the downtown patio program, including public engagement. Reinforce that the childcare remains a priority and the town will continually look at innovative ways to create additional private and public spaces in the community. Report back on the Discover St. Mary's website, its efficiency in generating web traffic with a recommendation to keep or consolidate with the corporate site. Review and develop strategies on how the town can increase participation in public engagement, surveys, etc., including strategies on how to collect a representative voice of the community. And then more related to the conversation we had about the strategic action plan under Pillar 1, report back on designating the remaining town icons listed in Pillar 1. Under Pillar 3, include a call to action to be a strong and competitive employer. Include a call to action to continually show the town functions well as an independent municipality. Under Pillar 5, include a call to action to continually develop, maintain, and update a business inventory for the community. Finally, under Pillar 6, to report back on which long-term housing initiatives can be prioritized into the short or medium term. Report back on the ability to develop short-term rentals in the downtown UTRCA regulated area under commercial designation rather than a residential designation. And finally, report back on the CIPA program, the budget, and budgetary allocations between the housing-related components and the other programs in the CIP.
Okay, so that's basically a summary of our discussions today. Councilor Pridham, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the report back and revisit the strategies for additional trade shows and conferences and such, that it's outsourced, that it's not on staff's shoulders to create a whole new event, unless that's where they're wanting to go with that. I mean, that's up to them, I suppose, but to bring in things, so it's just more or less hosting it in the space.
I think whether or not you wish to have that added, I think that's understood. That's how I would have asked staff to approach it, is to go seek out something that exists and attract it here rather than a person locating somewhere else.
Councilor Howard?
Thanks, Your Worship. I was just thinking, so under Pillar 5 there with the call to action to develop and maintain a business inventory. So we do have, like, and I believe you mentioned it, like the business directory on the Discover site. Like, what more are we looking for in that regard?
Again, and maybe I'll defer this to Councillor Luna. This is just a response to that, her comment of if somebody was to come forward and say, I'm interested, approach economic development and say, I'm interested in starting up a nail salon, do we have a way to communicate to people how many nail salons already exist? So again, I haven't been a prospective business owner or business opener in St. Mary's to know where I would go and seek information. So I don't know if the intent there is more for tourism or as it is more for, if I'm coming to St. Mary's and I think there might be a need in St. Mary's for another pizza shop, is there a place for me to go and do some market research to figure out if there's enough pizza shops? I think that's how I heard from Councillor Luna.
Yeah, Councillor, do you want to add anything to that or no? No, okay. Yep. Yep.
So I was just thinking, because so the business directory, it is on the Discover site, which is more geared towards tourism. So I don't know if there is a way that we could somehow just kind of copy and paste or get that information extracted.
And in fairness, I'm always prepared to critically analyze the way we do things. I have a counselor and Counselor Luna not knowing we even have that. So to me, that means we might have a bit of an issue that we may have to communicate this a little bit better. So the fact that Counselor Luna wasn't aware that we had a business directory, to me is something I think, even at a minimum, if staff come back and say, well, we have it and it's functioning well, then the challenge is, well, okay, then how do we make sure people are aware of it if a counselor's not even aware of it?
Thank you, and just keep it up to date. Like, how up to date is that list?
It's actually
Is it?
pretty good. I was going
Is
through
it?
it just now to check for new businesses. They do pretty well.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Craig Mao?
Thank you, Worship. Under Pillar 6, that report back on the CIP programs. When you report back, I think it would be very good if we had the information, also the uptake on the CIPs, you know, over the last, say, 5 years. Have they been different each year, or 80% of them the same person applying year after year? That might be handy for council to know if you're doing that. And I had one other question, and it was, yeah, I'm still on. I had one other question that was really related to the user fees. So I understand in our conversation that it may be different, say, for minor hockey, because it goes through St. Mary's Minor Hockey. But if a family is from out of town and doesn't pay a user fee going through minor hockey, but then if they do pay a user fee going to put their same child in a pool event, because it's through the town, through our website, isn't that going to stir a lot of questions around as why is it charged here and not here, and you're just opening up a real can of worms?
We'll revisit that with the report, but yeah.
And through the mayor, yeah, that was kind of what when I have a vision in my head for a report, it's not a short report, it probably is a long report of using some case examples of, you know, here's how you could do, here's other, you know, it can be meta research. So here's how municipalities who do it, here are methods and how they implement it. And then locally, this is how it would work here in terms of, you know, things like, you know, how could it work for aquatics? How could it work for ice? And then just give you some case studies of what the pros and cons could be so you could fully consider it.
Yeah, and we did look at this one time before, a long time ago, and the numbers were not significant at the time. And so that's something I think we need to revisit, because I think, you know, the reality being raised, it's been some quite time we've looked at the numbers and usage, and things may have changed a lot since COVID. So I think it's definitely a good exercise.
Yeah, and that's what I had in my note is that we could, I didn't put in there, but like right away, I think we could probably get a good estimate of how many out-of-town users use our facility. And then what I would like to do is render this down to a financial decision for you, so you know if you did this, like how much extra revenue you could generate. Because I think if we were having all of this conversation, we did the math, and you realize you could only generate, say, $5,000 to $10,000 extra in revenue every year, it might factor into, like, then at least you know, like, the benefit, and I can tell you then what the costs are and staff time and all that stuff, and it becomes an easier decision to make.
Yeah, and we did that, but it's several years ago.
Yeah.
It was pre-COVID, so I think it's worth revisiting. Councilor Luna? Yeah.
I think my whole point of that initiative that I brought forward was to justify a taxpayer paying the same amount of money for XYZ as an out-of-towner does. And I still don't think it's fair to the taxpayer to pay the same price.
Yep, and that's fine. We'll revisit that during the report. Yep. Okay. Anything else with regards to the summary? Councilor Lucas?
Thank you, through the mayor. Just the first point there, under the strategic, or under the corporate priorities, the road reconstruction projects, I think development should be added in there. As I drive out Glass Street, we have problems with parking out there, and we have massive boulevards. So I think when it comes to development, we can look at laybys, like, for example, like what we have right out here in front of the town hall. So where it says road reconstruction, I think it should say and development projects where appropriate. I just think given the fact that we're promoting ADUs, we're promoting increased density, we're lessening our parking responsibility on the development, like on the builder. I think some of that can fall into the development community to create some parking, whether you go narrower streets or wider streets with extra parking on one side, or whether you do laybys in the boulevard. It just, to me, to have all that parking or all that boulevard space may not, of grass, might be better served as asphalt.
Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have a problem with that? Because we'll just, rather than going through the motion now, we'll just put it in if that's okay with everyone. Yeah,
I think
go ahead.
it's addressed probably for the downtown. When you look at the downtown, we're looking at parking, but other municipally owned or attractions, like for the top of head, the museum, where you've got, 2 or 3 spots up there. But if there were to be work done on that lane coming up to the museum and that area, then you would automatically look at things like that with parking in mind.
And again, the way I understand it too is when we look at like a road reconstruction project, and it might be, we have that full cross-section, but then it might be, an older road that has narrow lanes. When we look at doing the design, can we make it wider so that there is on-street parking, proper on-street parking available that we can then formally delineate all that good stuff? And especially in areas, like I said, where I think you said it, where there's an amenity. If there's a park, if it's fronting a park, then we should make sure there's proper parking there.
Yeah, because you take that little green space, and even if you just put that little green space, you've got one car not fully parked on the road, it's tucked in a little bit for traffic.
Okay, any other points with regards to the motion, the summary, and discussions from today? I think it was a good discussion, and I think everyone's given a lot of thought. I think that's pretty evident in the comments, so I do appreciate that. I think it's been a valuable exercise. So if everyone's okay, I'll put the suggested motion on the floor. So the suggested motion would be that report admin 11-2026 council end of term strategic priorities be received, and that the CO be directed to revise the 2026 corporate priorities and projects to include the following edits for the strategic priorities committee to consider at a future meeting. Establish standards to include on-site parking during road construction and development projects where appropriate, taking a more proactive role in supporting and marketing community events. Report back on how proactive zoning bylaw enforcement could be implemented, embracing all creative and innovative ideas and initiatives to create housing. Report back and revisit the strategy to secure additional trade shows, conferences, fairs, etc. at the PRC. Report back on methods and approaches to implement out-of-town user fees for recreation. Complete a review of the downtown patio program, including public engagement. Reinforce that childcare remains a priority, and the town will continue to look at innovative ways to create additional private and public spaces in the community. Report back on the Discover St. Mary's website, its efficiency in generating web traffic, with recommendations to keep or consolidate with the corporate site. Excuse me. Review and develop strategies on how the town can increase participation in public engagement, surveys, etc., including strategies on how to collect a representative voice from the community, and that the CEO be directed to revise the 2026 Strategic Action Plan update to include the following edits for the Strategic Priorities Committee to consider at a future meeting. Pillar number 1, report back on designating the remaining town icons listed in pillar number 1. Pillar number 3, include a call to action to be a strong and competitive employer. Include a call to action to continually show the town functions well as an independent municipality. Pillar number 5, include a call to action to continually develop, maintain, and update a business inventory for the community. Pillar number 6, report back on which long-term housing initiatives can be prioritized in the short term or medium term. Report back on the ability to develop short-term rentals in the downtown UTRC regulated area under commercial designation rather than a residential designation, and report back on the CIP program budget and budgetary allocations between the housing-related components and other programs in the CIP. Is someone willing to move that motion? We'll put it on the floor first, then actually prepare. Moved by Councillor Luna. Seconder? Councillor Alward. Councillor Prideaux.
I'm just suggesting that we include, as Councillor Lucas had said, road reconstruction, development, and also town-owned assets to look at the parking for the first on-street parking during road reconstruction.
We had I did put development projects in the.
Did you read that?
But I didn't.
Did you read it that way?
I did read it that way, I think.
Okay, sorry.
But I don't know about the town. Was there a town thing? I didn't understand.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just like, for instance, the museum piece, like the town-owned, if we're doing.
Where would we capture that? I'm just trying
in
to.
the same area, road reconstruction and town-owned asset projects where appropriate.
So you want, just, I want clarify the phrasing. So you would say and town-owned projects, and town-owned assets, is that what you're looking
Sure.
for?
Projects where appropriate.
Okay. So Councillor Pridham's suggesting an amendment, town-owned assets. Councillor Luna, is that favorable to your, and Councillor Alberg? Okay. Councillor Luna, yep.
Just a question, thank you, Worship. Is it presumed that these edits will be brought back to this council before the council end of term?
If I do my job right, you should have it next SPC meeting. Yeah. What I truly intend is, what I'm hearing from you is that some of these things you'd like to know before your end of your term. So I have the the ability to go and speak with my staff now about some of their goals for this year. But some of these report backs, I would hope happen in the next 3 to 4 months.
Okay. Anything further with regards to the motion or the summary presented today? All right, seeing none, I'll call the question on the motion as amended. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Is that, thank you for that. Under upcoming meetings, item number 5, we have May 19th as our next Strategic Priorities Committee meeting. Is there anything else anyone wanted to mention as far as meetings? Okay, so then I'll seek an adjournment that this meeting be adjourned at 11:24 a.m. Someone willing to move that motion? Moved by Councillor Craigmile, second by Councillor Edney. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you for today.